see if I can get some in the chat if anyone has questions. Feel free to shoot them out. Oh boy. This is our Intro to Linux slide deck. I have no idea who made it. I'm sure Cole would be able to throw it in the chat if he's here / paying attention. It was here when I got here. Been here for a while. So, who uses Linux? About 2/3 of public websites. A lot of different people who work on or with computers. Android uses a type of Linux. That's actually what it is. Researchers, hobbyists, anyone who wants to get down in the guts with computers. Now, kind of mentioned this already, but why would you want to use Linux when you have such amazing operating systems like Windows and Mac OS? Linux lets you do everything. If you want to get down into the guts, you want to work on configuration files and like that, it just lets you do it, which can be really great and really bad because you can completely screw yourself over by deleting very important files or changing them. But also, if you know what you're doing or are attempting to learn what you're doing, this is the perfect area. And I just stopped sharing this for some reason. Can people still see the presentation?
No, I just see. Oh, there it goes back. Okay.
There it goes back. Not sure why that happened. Linux is also available to be run on very small systems. If anyone's worked with like Raspberry Pis, they use a form of Linux as well. This lets you work on extremely small computers to the very large, like supercomputers. All of them can run Linux. A little bit of history. The Unix type systems began in 1969 at Bell Labs. A lot of really interesting stuff happening in the 60s and late 60s, 70s. Encourage everyone to look it up, see the history of the operating system that expecting most of you will end up being familiar with if you're not already familiar with. Back then, they built a lot of the user components. This is stuff like text editors and whatnot. However, they were still missing the kernel, which was developed by Linus Torvald. I'm terrible at pronouncing names. It's really bad without like any sort of feel of what people are looking at. Normally, I'm able to see if people are just miserable with my presentations. So he released it as open source. Back to the presentation, he released it as open source, and that lets people get in there, edit, update it, and whatnot. So GNU is the user tools that I mentioned before briefly. Technically, that is on top of the Linux kernel. Let's see if I can. You can see my cursor. Linux kernel is sitting on top of the hardware, and then GNU sits on top of that, which lets you use the desktop and whatnot. You'll learn about that if you're in a computery. You'll learn about all of that later on in your course. So, what does actually using Linux look like? There's a lot of text sometimes if you're using the terminals, which is what I tend to do. And then you get these nice, fun kernel panics and whatnot that normally shows that you did something wrong, and then you restarted your machine, and now your machine doesn't have critical files. And that's why you keep backups. Otherwise, there's a lot of different desktop environments. Nice thing about Linux as compared to Mac or Windows, where with the main, like with Mac and Windows, you only have two types of looks, basically. With Linux, you have a huge number of looks. We have some screenshots here of what the desktop environments can look like. You can get anything from sort of a Windows-looking one to a Mac-looking one. And the terminals. So, but there's a couple different types of Linux. One part about being open source is everyone can edit this. You can make your own Linux distribution if you want, which means that you have a huge number of distributions. The big ones are Debian style ones, Ubuntu, Linux Mint. You also have stuff from Red Hat, such as Fedora and CentOS. You also have Arch Linux types. Most people, for their first ones, either choose sort of like Ubuntu or Linux Mint. I'm kind of familiar with the Debian-based models, which Ubuntu is one of. That's the one I would recommend, but teach their own. Then how can you learn how to use it? If you're using Windows, they have a nifty little feature that lets you have a Ubuntu subsystem running, so you can get a bash terminal. I don't run Windows, so I don't have a huge amount of experience with this. We also have dual booting. This can be done on any computer. Basically, this has a separate chunk of your hard drive or an entirely separate hard drive that has your entire Linux operating system on it, and then you boot into that one. It's kind of iffy. You can dual boot. So I have a Mac computer, and you can dual boot on Mac, and you can even attempt to triple boot, and that's a mistake. But the best option, and especially if you're a beginner, is using the virtual machines. This basically allows you to simulate a whole other computer on top of your computer. This lets you back it up very easily, start it up really easily without having to restart your whole computer. Drag and drop if you can figure out how that works. You can also just really dive in and do you have a question? Nope. All right. You can also dive in and install it as your main operating system. You also, since you are ISU students, have access to remote servers. Iowa State has the Linux remote.engineering.iastate.edu, which is available to all engineering students. And then if you're in the ECE department, you have the Linux-1-7.ece.iastate.edu. And this is a nice little thing where you get to just SSH or use PuTTY to get connected to that. We'll cover what that is a little bit later. This lets you fiddle around with it without having to install anything or change anything on your own system. The one downside I would say is you don't actually have root permissions, which means you can't do whatever you want to do. You only get to do what Iowa State lets you do, which is perfectly fine for most things, except if you want to start experimenting and breaking things. So how would you connect to this? If you're on Windows, you want to use the PuTTY terminal. I don't have a huge amount of experience with this, but I've heard good things. Basically, you'll download it from putty.org, go through the whole installation process, go in there, and you can enter in the server that you want. This is these locations right here. Include your net ID, port 2020, SSH, hit open. Yes, and there's also the option for Docker, which I'm not familiar with. See, you can use PuTTY to get in there. That lets you sign in. Or if you're on Mac, they have the SSH command built in, so you can hit command the space bar and then type terminal. Your terminal shows up then SSH net ID at server you want to get into. Hit enter. It'll ask you for your password. You type it in. Now you have access to that remote server.
But you must be on ISU VPN.
You must be on ISU VPN. That is a good point to make. All right. So you've decided that connecting to a remote server, not for you. How do you pick what type of distribution that you want to download? These are the Ubuntu's, Debians that I was talking about before. You can go to the distro testnet, and from there you can try out a bunch of different ones, see how they feel and whatnot, just in your browser before you download them, because those can be rather large download files. Now that you're in it, whether you've used the server or you've learned how to install it for yourself and you've installed it, you're going to want to find your way around. We're going to do we're going to focus on using the terminal because that just gives you a lot more power over your computer. The first thing what you're going to want to do is learn these 3 commands. They're probably the ones that I use the most often. CD simply lets you change directory, or think folder for computer or Windows and Mac and whatnot. This lets you change what folder you're in. List, or LS, shows what files you have in your folder. And then print working directory, or PWD, prints the file path that you're in. So this lets you move around and navigate where you are in your computer. Now that we were able to move around some, we want to actually change our files a little bit. CP, or copy, lets you change or copy a file from one place to another. You add the R flag, so -R, which lets you copy entire directories and folders from one place to another. The move command lets you move. This also serves as a renaming because if you move old to new, it doesn't keep a copy of old, so just change the name. And then delete, or deleting files, is done with RM. And RM, you can add the -R flag to delete entire directories. The one thing that I'll say is, if you're used to being able to go into your trash to recover stuff you accidentally deleted, that doesn't work. Linux assumes you know what you're doing and will do whatever you ask it to do. So if you say delete, that file is gone. Some other file manipulation stuff. Touch lets you create a new file, and then make directory, or mkdir, creates a new folder. Cat displays the values in the folder onto your terminal. So cat text.txt just displays all of the text into your terminal. Sometimes that's not ideal because it could be a 1,000-page long file, in which case you'd use less, which lets you flip through it rather than just having it scroll out. Tail shows the last parts of the file, which is useful for log files when they just add extra logs and you've broken something and now you want to check your error logs. So now that we're able to create files, let's figure out how to write to them. There's 3 major file editors in Linux. Nano, which is what I believe they recommend you use in the 230, 231 classes. It's everywhere. It's pretty easy to learn. It's got its little tutorial, how to write, how to save and whatnot, undo, copy, paste, and stuff. Just right on the bottom all the time. Vim, this is what I use, is a little bit less intuitive. By a little bit, I mean a lot. I'm got to Google to figure out what every key does. Main things is Vim, file name, that gets you into lets you open up the editor. If you hit I, now you can start typing, hit escape, colon, WQ, yes. Actually, here, I'm just going to, here, colon WQ lets you write and quit. That'll be a better method for me rather than just speaking out commands, which I'm sure everyone was able to follow perfectly. And then we also have Emacs, which I have never used. However, apparently because I use Vim means I must think it's worse. I don't know, I believe Moody knows some, if he's here, about Emacs. Another thing to look at, just because I use it does not mean it's better. It just means I have more experience in it, so it's easier for me. And next. All right. Now that we're able to move files around and write to them, a little bit about some well, the first level of security. Yeah, I'll call it the first level of security. Files have permissions, and you can see that right here. If you guys can't see my cursor, you guys should let me know. So permissions are separated into 3 chunks. The first chunk right here is your permissions on the file for read, write, and execute. The second 3 are what your group is. I've never seen groups really implemented in Linux. This is more of a holdover, I believe. And then the last 3 is other or world. And this is what everyone can do to it. So if you have a file or that only you can read and write to and no one else can do anything, the sticky bit is something I know about but don't actually know enough about to talk.
So the sticky bit basically only allows the owner to edit or delete, I believe, the file, if I remember correctly. Hold on, let me pull up my 252 notes.
All right.
I'll post sticky bit in chat. Go ahead.
All right. And our last 3 is what the whole world can do. This lets you change. Maybe you want the world to be able to read your file, but not to be able to write to it, or they should be able to read it but not execute it, or execute it but not read it. There's 3, so what does that make it, like 6 or something, different combinations? I'm sure you guys can figure it out. So this is represented. This can either be represented by their numbers, where read is worth 4, write is 2, and execute is 1. So this gives you their octal value. So read, write, execute is worth 7. Read and write is 6, so on and so forth. This means that you can use the command change mod, which is to change the file permission on it, and you can use the octal representation of it. Change mod 777 gives everyone access to it. Or if you don't want to memorize what all of the octal values are, you can have change mod user, group, other, and you can give them read, write, and execute permissions. And you can do this in all of the different ways. So now that we're able to write and read files, control who can access them, we have processes, or the ability to run programs. The first thing you want to you can check is who am I, or your ID. This lets you know what permissions you have. Always fun on capture the flags and competitions. Type in who am I and get root. That's always a fun time. If you're sharing the system with other people, you can use wall and write to a user, or just wall to write to everyone. Never really used servers with a bunch of people. Another holdover, I believe. PS, aux, and top both let you see what processes are running. If you run that as root, or you use sudo, which is maybe a little bit more advanced than what we're doing right now. Sudo basically lets you run stuff as root. For either of these, that'll let you see everything that's happening. And then after you see what's happening, you'll get a process ID number, or PID, and you can use kill if you want to kill it softly, and then escalating through how more powerful of kill. Of course, there's a huge number of other commands that you may see reference to in online tutorials and whatnot. Here are a couple of commands that kind of help you figure out what a particular command does. The man, or the manual page, opens up the documentation for the command you want to run. This is Normally, I mean, you have all the information you need there. It's a little bit hard to parse through, though. I would recommend. Okay, I'd recommend googling die, DIE, die command man. So where a command is the command you're trying to figure out, which gives you a nice page that's properly formatted as a web page. It looks much nicer and is much easier to read. Apropos, lets you find a command based on like a rough English definition of it or along that. So if it's throwing out errors and whatnot and you don't know what to do, you can throw that in there. What is gives a description of your command. Where is shows where the program for that command is stored on your computer. Let's see, I believe which goes through the aliases, was it? All right. And then most commands also have a help or -H. So if you want a quick idea of what a command does, typing it out and then putting the -H flag in there normally gives you a very brief sort of breakdown of what you can put into that command and what you're going to get out. All right. Some other useful programs, utilities. HTOP sort of lets you constantly monitor stuff. It's basically top, but it's colored, it's nice, it's better. These list commands let you see more information about their corresponding commands. List CPO gives you more information about CPU, USB, so on and so forth. The tar archive utility, definitely something that's worth kind of learning about. Basically, it lets you compress and decompress stuff. Curl or wget lets you download stuff from the internet. Useful if you're trying to get files. You can copy stuff that way, or you can get stuff from the internet that way. So, does anyone have any questions? There's a decent chance I rushed through that, and that being my first presentation with this slide set, missed some very important things.
If somebody wants to install a Linux distro, where should they look for tutorials?
I would say Google. Depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to, let's see, I would recommend using VirtualBox. I'm actually throwing together instructions for my English class right now on how to download Linux on VirtualBox. Otherwise, just Googling Linux on VirtualBox. Do you have any suggestions for us, Liam?
Well, one, if any of you want to install it either on a local host, aka your machine, a server, or VirtualBox, feel free to always message us in Slack or email us or whatnot. Secondly, DigitalOcean for some reason has really good tutorials on installing, operating systems on local machines and whatnot. So that's another resource. Otherwise, I'll see if I can find some links and I'll post them in like a resource channel on Slack.
If I can,
Go ahead.
if I can chime in, Tech Site has VMware Workstation available for, I think it's free, or a license through IO States on the hub. So if I think, so let me check and make sure.
Yeah, Liam also made a really good point. A lot of this stuff isn't super easy just to take in all at once from a slide deck and a presentation, but the Slack channel is always open. I'm always happy to try to help troubleshoot stuff, help you install VirtualBox or dual boot your machine or whatever. I'm always willing to help out. As long as like I don't have a deadline in 5 minutes. And you're probably going to get a lot of good help if you ask on the Slack channel.
Yeah, probably. I'm usually up all hours of the night. I've got it on a local box, got it on servers. So if I've screwed it up, probably help you out too.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the learning that I've done has been, ooh, that'd be a good idea. 12 hours later, that was a terrible idea, but now I know how to do it.
Those never end well.
Yeah.
Yep,
Anyone
so,
else with questions or things to chime in?
yeah, so the tech site does offer the VMware Workstation 15 for Windows, VMware Fusion 11 for Macs, as well as some other higher end stuff for virtualization.
Is that through Iowa State?
Yep. And it's free, but you can only download one copy at a time every 12 months. I can post a link to it in Slack.
And Liam, you've posted those both in Slack?
I will after this.
All right.
But no, yes, those licenses are time gated, 12 months.
Does anyone else have questions?
Do you know a good collection of ISOs? You mean like a whole bunch of different distros and like a collection that you could just mass download? Is that what you mean, Noah? It's highly advised against to do that. You always want to download a new ISO and verify it with the hash just to make sure that the collection you're getting it from hasn't altered that ISO in any way, shape, or form.
Also, downloading a huge thing of ISOs could probably be like 50 gigabytes or more.
At a minimum.
At a minimum, yeah. I mean, I have a hard drive of all the ISOs I just store every time I have to download a new one, and it's approaching 80 gigabytes, easy.
Any other questions anyone have?
Well, I think that's the meeting then.
Yeah, but yeah. Sorry, I thought we were talking. No, yeah, I'd say we're probably good. And then don't be afraid to always, Slack us or email us or whatever if you have questions.
Mm-hmm. If you don't know it, it's not a dumb question to ask.
Everyone's got to start somewhere.
I remember, 2 years ago, I didn't know how to use a command line at all. Never even knew it existed. So, ask questions out of personal practice. If you want different things to work on, feel free to shoot a Slack messages. I'm sure we all have our own.
Yeah, I got tons of projects you could do.
Well, I'm gonna head out. I'm in the middle of a CTF, so
I'll have fun.
Oh yeah. Yep. It is the Sands Fast Track.
I knew that was going on.
Yeah.
Damn, I missed another one?
Yeah, it started at 11.